The global immigration crisis is not a sudden phenomenon, but a consequence of a long history of unfair competitive practices that have exacerbated disparities and income inequalities among nations. Post-industrial countries, particularly the United States, United Kingdom, France, Canada, have wielded their economic power to maintain dominance, often at the expense of developing nations. Today, I want to put the immigration crisis into perspective on this episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast, entitled Unfair Competitive Practices, the Root Cause of Immigration Crisis. Unfair competitive practices, the root cause of immigration crisis. That's the title of an article I just published in the Neoliberal Journals and the Neoliberal Post, and I also submitted it as a letter to be considered as a letter in publication, or publication in the Jamaica Gleaner and the Jacobin magazine. But here is the article. The global immigration crisis is not a sudden phenomenon, but a consequence of a long history of unfair competitive practices that have exacerbated disparities and income inequalities among nations. Post-industrial countries, particularly the United States, United Kingdom, France, and Canada, have wielded their economic power to maintain dominance, often at the expense of developing nations. You see where we're going with this. Again, they have wielded their economic power to maintain dominance, often at the expense of developing nations. The immigration crisis is the consequence of the expense. The consequence of the expense on developing nations that the US, UK, and these countries have applied, in a sense, based on their competitive strategies and their drive to maintain their dominance. We're going to flesh that out some more. But throughout history, post-industrial nations have exploited other countries, extracting wealth and resources while leaving behind populations trapped in poverty. And of course, I've written about this. I've written in my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance. And that was my thesis at the University of Pennsylvania between 2010 and 2013. So, when we say that throughout history, post-industrial nations have exploited other countries, extracting wealth and resources while leaving behind populations trapped in poverty, it is driven by research that we have already published in the book Neoliberalism Book 1, and we're getting ready to release in Book 2, Neoliberal Globalization Reconsidered, Neo-Capitalism and the Death of Nations. Now, this strategy that we're talking about, the strategy that post-industrial nations have exploited, the exploitation of other countries, extracting their wealth and resources and leaving behind populations trapped in poverty. This strategy has been driven by a desire to preserve competitive advantages and uphold economic dominance. Consequently, countries like Mexico, Venezuela, Haiti, and DR, that's on the island of Hispaniola, and those in other countries in the Caribbean, like Jamaica and so on, have been strategically kept at a disadvantage to prevent them from rivaling the wealth and influence of more developed nations, especially those that they border, like Canada and the US. The same thing is happening in Eastern Europe today, but of a different pedigree. And I go a little bit further talking about that in the book Neoliberalism, Neoliberal Globalization Reconsidered. For instance, if a country like Jamaica were to experience significant growth and development, attracting higher wages and reducing the availability of cheap labor, it would disrupt the economic balance that benefits the US. Consequently, policies have been designed to perpetuate dependency and prevent the rise of competing economies in the global south. This is a very vital and poignant point which I must state again. If a country like Jamaica were to experience significant growth and development, attracting higher wages and reducing the availability of cheap labor, it would disrupt the economic balance that benefits the US. Consequently, policies have been designed to perpetuate dependency and prevent the rise of competing economies in the global south. Moreover, post-industrial nations have flooded global markets with their products, undercutting local manufacturers in developing countries and perpetuating a cycle of economic dependency. If these nations were to develop the capacity to compete effectively, it would threaten the profits of post-industrial countries, leading to decreased consumption of their goods. Additionally, and I want you to follow me here, the phenomenon of brain drain further exacerbates the disparities between nations. The best and brightest individuals from developing countries often seek opportunities in post-industrial countries and nations, leaving behind limited means for others. Now, this brain drain deprives developing nations of valuable human capital while enriching post-industrial countries or economies. Now, the issue of illegal immigration, particularly into the United States, the UK, Canada, France, the big countries, is often framed as a problem of border security. However, it is essential to recognize that those crossing borders illegally are often individuals driven by economic desperation, created by unfair competition and policies that favor the privileged few. What is true of the local is true of the global. We talk about income inequality within countries, but what about income inequalities globally? The global income inequality, when you look at global income inequality, and the fact that over the last 10 years it has risen drastically, is an indication also of what's going on in terms of travel and immigration, and the immigration policies in the local, and the immigration or travel in globally. Say, for example, when you talk about tax codes and meeting tax codes and the ability of certain families to be able to earn a certain income and be able to pay rent at a certain level within certain communities or taxes within certain communities, certain properties are high in certain areas to keep out certain people. Now, when you talk about it in terms of looking at it in terms of immigration of course is going to favor high income earners, especially in a post-industrial wealthy country. Whatever the case is, furthermore, it's important to acknowledge that illegal immigration doesn't just represent a crisis. It doesn't only represent a crisis. It also presents opportunities for some Americans to exploit. Border agents, for instance, have been reportedly charging exorbitant sums to assist illegal migrants across the border, turning the desperation of migrants into a lucrative business opportunity. And we're not making up stories. These are actual stories that we have heard, people we have spoken to about this. Now, and we have sources who can corroborate, and have provided us with the information. That is why we are able to report this. Now, while some may use political talking points to demean immigration, it's crucial to understand that the crisis is in large part a consequence of a corrupt system that benefits certain individuals at the expense of vulnerable migrants. So to truly address the immigration crisis, there must be a concerted effort to rectify the structural inequities or inequalities that perpetuate poverty and drive migration. This requires a reevaluation of competitive strategies that prioritize the interests of post-industrial nations at the expense of developing countries. The political will to address these issues is crucial, even if it means sacrificing some advantages currently enjoyed by post-industrial nations. In conclusion, the migration crisis cannot be solved solely through border enforcement or border enforcement measures. It requires a fundamental shift in global economic policies and a commitment to promoting equitable development worldwide. And not just economic policies, in terms of the way we view competition among nations. As long as we have, and I talk about that in my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, in book 1. And in book 2, and of course, this is an excerpt of book 2, looking at neoliberal globalization, reconsidered, neo-capitalism and the death of nations. And in order to truly address the immigration crisis, we have to revisit and give up or make some sacrifices, give up some of the competitive advantages that we have. And we're not going to do that. So we will forever have the crisis unless we erect huge edifices and walls at the border and guns, artificial guns and so on and so forth. Some draconian measures to keep up people. That will never solve the problem. But as I said to you, it requires a fundamental shift in global economic policies and a commitment to promoting equitable development worldwide. Only then can we begin to address the root causes of migration and create a more just and sustainable world. I'm Renaldo McKenzie, and this is another brief episode of the Neoliberal podcast, talking about a very crucial issue, the issue of immigration. This particular article is available in the Neoliberal journals at neoliberal.com and also in the Neoliberal post at renaldocmckenzie.com, in our feeds, in my LinkedIn feeds as well. And of course, you can also, and just so you know, you can subscribe to the podcast. We're available in over 36 countries, on over 12 different platforms and YouTube. And we encourage you to subscribe for free and to donate to us by going to anchor.fm/theneoliberal/support. You can go to theneoliberal.com and go to our menu and click on support, and you can support us that way as well. We definitely need your support so that we can meet our niche market in putting out this very important and vital book. We're also working on another project looking at changing attitudes towards Afro-Caribbean beliefs. I'm Renaldo McKenzie, and please continue to support us. And coming up next on the Neoliberal podcast is part 2 of a special that we're doing, looking at support for Biden or Trump among Black and brown people. We released part 1, which was Philadelphia. Part 2 will be New York. Join us tomorrow for that. Tomorrow evening at around 6 o'clock, we'll make that episode available. Thank you for making it the Neoliberal Corporation. We're always serving the world today to solve tomorrow's challenges by making popular what was the monopoly. And just so you know, we provide a range of solutions. You can go to our store page at store.theneoliberal.com, and if you need IT services, website services, hosting and domain services, you can go to our IT services by going to antsbusinesssolutions.com or antshosting.com. I'm Renaldo McKenzie.